And then
did you guys already?
give me 1 second and I'm gonna start the live in just a couple seconds.
Guess that'll work.
But we'll give it a couple minutes.
I
Yeah.
scarfed down my lunch.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, Jay,
Afternoon.
another night together?
Another night. I got one after this at 8 o'clock, Southland Park Neighborhood Association.
All right, so we are about to be live.
Just a reminder, if you're not a panelist, please turn off your video. I might call you out if that's the case.
Okay, we are now live on Facebook as well.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Chenier. I'm representing District 5 and here with Councilmember Eric Guerra from District 6.
Hey, everybody.
We first of all want to thank everyone for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Just we want to respect people's time, both at the front end and the back end. And we're scheduled till 6:30. We will be done by 6:30. So thank you all. This is the third in a series of town halls that Councilmember Guerra and I have done with a lot of our staff, both from our offices, from UC Davis, from Wexford, and from the city itself. The first one we did was on workforce development. The second one was on housing. I believe those recordings are available, and I'm going to ask Allison if she could type into the chat where you would go if you wanted to hear one of the recordings from one of the previous town halls. We've had about the same number of people, I would say between 70 and 90 who registered, generally somewhere between 40 and 60 who have shown up. We really appreciate your time. What we're going to do tonight is talk about transportation and the issues associated with transportation and mobility. We have with us tonight a number of folks who've been involved with this project for a long time. Matt Dulcich and Bob Seeger representing UC Davis, Jennifer Donlin Wyatt, Drew Hart, and Jennifer Venema from the city of Sacramento and the city manager's office and public works in Sacramento. And then James Boyle, who is with Sacramento Regional Transit, who is their chief planner. We also have with us tonight Doug Woodruff, who is the lead for Wexford on this project, Joel Swift, Ingrid Stromberg, Sarah Janis from UC Davis. We have Sonia Colbert and Mabel Salon. And then our own Leslie Fritchie, who has been working night and day on this project for quite a while now. So all of those folks will be resources as we go forward. What we're going to do on the agenda is we'll hear from Bob and Matt to talk a little bit about UC Davis and what they're currently doing. Then we're going to hear from Jennifer Donlin Wyatt, who's going to talk a little bit about what the city is doing around the transportation issues. And then we'll go more towards an informal discussion. I have some questions, but if you all have questions, please type them into the Q&A function, not the chat function. But we would appreciate if everyone could put their name and emails and organizations that they represent, if you represent an organization, into the chat so we can make sure that you're on our mailing list for future events concerning Aggie Square. But again, just as a reminder, it really helps us if you put your questions into the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. If we can't get to some, we will get them answered and post that on websites connected to this. So with that, I want to introduce again Matt Dulcich and Bob Seeger. We're going to talk a little bit about what UC Davis is currently doing. Bob or Matt?
That's great. Thank you very much, Councilmember Chenier and Councilmember Guerra. Thank you very much for hosting us. we did want to get us started with kind of a perspective on just framing this discussion. And this slide that Jennifer has up is really just showing the neighborhoods in relationship to the UC Davis Sacramento campus, with the shaded areas being the land that UC Davis owns. And you can see there that we're also referring to in this discussion Stockton Boulevard quite a bit, Broadway. Later we'll be talking about, I think, the frontage of Stockton Boulevard and the intersection of Broadway and Stockton. And then during Q&A, there might come up questions about the Elmhurst neighborhood or Highway 50. These are shown on this map, and we might refer back to this map or flip back to it if it's helpful to explain an issue, or if it's helpful for one of the questions, we can make sure everyone is on the right page about where we're talking about geographically. So we just wanted to start with this page as an orientation. And as we switch to the next page, I think Bob Seeger, you might want to just introduce yourself, say hello. And that's great, Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Bob Seeger. I'm with UC Davis. And I'm directing the planning for the Aggie Square project over the last 2.5 years. Matt, I don't know if you want me to walk people through the diagram or if you want to do that.
I think I could get us going on this, and then I'll give a short handoff to you for Aggie Square. But yeah, this diagram is that next zoom in of the version we saw previously with the shaded land area. And that's the UC Davis Sacramento campus, about 150 acres. And in the same color, we're showing Stockton Boulevard in the pink ribbon, also Broadway crossing Stockton, and really setting up the idea that this diagram may look familiar to you. This is the infographic that we've been using for the UC Davis Long Range Development Plan at the Sacramento campus. And that term, LRDP, Long Range Development Plan, is just the university process for charting the kind of long-term planning for a campus. In some ways, it's like a general plan for a city. And we update them kind of every 10 or 20 years. And this LRDP shows to the right of our screen some growth metrics with building square footage, our existing numbers, and our future upcoming projections through the year 2040. We then show campus population and campus parking. And those are kind of the overall metrics of our campus expected growth through the year 2040. The graphic itself with the shaded areas shows the areas that I think are familiar to many people on this workshop. In the blue is the hospital. The main core large buildings of the Sacramento campus are the hospital and its important function for regional healthcare. Then in the orange, we have our patient care district, and that has generally smaller buildings where instead of overnight hospital stays, patients have access to clinics, testing, diagnostic facilities, those kind of things. In the pink is the education core, and then in yellow is our collaboration and research. And you can see that's largely bounded by Stockton and Broadway. And there are some land areas there that are kind of not shaded, that are land that the university does not own. So it's a mixture of land that the university owns and land that the university does not own. So that's our primary planning effort. And between second and third, and Jennifer, you could switch to the next slide, is this area that's Aggie Square. And Bob, you might use this diagram to just highlight first the location of Aggie Square and then some of the prime elements. And really what we, after completing the LRDP as a primary planning, we then complete a lot of secondary planning, in this case for the 10 acres that's Aggie Square, but then also for things like utility studies, parking studies, those kind of things. So Bob, do you want to give some of the highlights about Aggie Square?
Sure, and I'll keep it brief because I know we want to get to the main event, but just to get you oriented again, you can see Stockton Boulevard. If you look at the number 3, that sits right on Stockton Boulevard. So again, the hospital would be like a couple of blocks off the upper left of this image. And these are the 4 main buildings that make up Aggie Square in color, where the green building being a proposed housing project, largely focused around student housing for both medical, nursing, undergraduate, graduate students, but possibly some housing for others as well. The blue buildings are lab buildings. And again, the thing that's different about Aggie Square from it's not a typical university style project. Like, for example, those 2 blue buildings are going to be lab buildings. They're 250,000 feet each. They're big, but only about half of those buildings will be occupied by the university. The other half will be occupied by other partners that cut across sectors. And that's when we talk about leveraging Aggie Square to propel inclusive economic development in Sacramento, it's because the university is locating its own work in such a way that it can be leveraged for additional investment. So there'll be industry there that wants to be near UC Davis research. There'll be other educational partners. There'll be community-based organizations. So housing building, 2 lab buildings in blue. The reddish building is we call a lifelong learning building, which will be focused on training and education. And Councilmember Schneer mentioned an earlier workshop around workforce development. A lot of those training activities, not just for university type training, but for technical training for jobs that don't require a higher education degree, will also be occurring with partners in that building. Hopefully really good public spaces, Aggie Square in yellow, a gathering and event space where community can come in and enjoy the activity here at Market Plaza, opening the campus up and this innovation district up to Stockton Boulevard. And again, a people place where there'll be hopefully farmers market and other reasons for people to step foot onto the campus and take participate in the kind of activity we'll have there. So I'll stop there. There's a lot more we could talk about. Number 5 is actually our planned mobility hub, which is relevant to this conversation tonight as well, where the electric buses that currently run from this Sacramento campus to downtown and to Davis dock there. And it's also seen as a place for shared mobility, bike share, car share, other modes, as well as the transit.
That's great, Bob. Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to also wrap up quickly. We did format this presentation to kind of hit these highlights, and then there's 3 different sections of our workshop that will have questions and answers. So although we're going fast through these, we will have the opportunity to flip back to them and answer questions or point out more details. So particularly if we've said something that's confusing, just bear with us. We'll get back to it. On the right there, I included another diagram of secondary planning that's kind of open space connections. That was an effort that's wrapped up in our planning effort that's called the Physical Design Framework. But if we switch down to the next slide, there's even an example of another type of planning that comes after an LRDP, and that's planning for transportation and parking. We can talk about that more later during some of the detailed efforts of this workshop. And then the next slide is also kind of a top 10 list of parking items and mobility options. So we might get to that later. And then going one more slide gets us back to the overall community perspective of orienting us to the Sacramento campus, the nearby roadways, Stockton and Broadway, and the nearby neighborhoods. So that's just kind of the overview of the UC Davis Sacramento campus planning effort, starting first at the LRDP and then progressing towards more detailed planning. And throughout the workshop tonight, we'll have the opportunity to answer any questions and address more in detail some of those efforts. So that's our wrap up. And Jennifer, did you want to start with this diagram to really talk about some of the city planning efforts?
Great, thanks, Matt. I'm actually going to go to the next slide. You might be seeing that already, to talk about a little bit of the transportation planning work that we're doing. So to introduce myself, my name is Jennifer Dolan Wyatt. My pronouns are she and her. And I manage transportation planning at the city. Drew Hart here is on my team. The projects begin generally with our team before they go over to building out. So just an overview of the work that we're doing in the area of Aggie Square around transportation planning. We have infrastructure, which I'll get to in a second. We're doing a lot of electrification. And so we have Jennifer Venema here, who is with the city manager's office. We'll be talking about the vehicle charging hubs we're doing and coming soon, the e-bike lending program, that we'll be doing. And then of course, our team also does the shared mobility, the shared bikes, the shared scooters, and shared electric vehicles. A lot of great sharing that we have going on. And you might not know about all the transportation work that we're doing in the area. So to quickly highlight the work that we're on, we have our Broadway Complete Streets project that started in 2012, which is mostly funded, and we hope to start construction soon. We just wrapped up the Envision Broadway and Oak Park project that was approved by council last year, and we actually applied for a grant this funding season to take it to the next step. We're working on the Franklin Boulevard Complete Streets effort. It's a little bit further away, but relevant to the discussion that we're having. Again, that's partially funded. We're looking for more funding. Our traffic safety work, which is that khaki green color that you see here, our Vision Zero Top 5. We've got 2 sections in the area. And then our Stockton Boulevard study, which is our big effort that we're undergoing right now. And if you heard about it, you probably know Drew Hart on this call. He's the project manager for that. And the yellow dots that you see, we just wrapped up a school safety audit. So we looked at 20 schools citywide. These are the schools in the general area near our traffic safety issues, but not on our high injury network, to work with our neighbors, our communities, and the schools to identify improvements. We're hoping to take that to council in February. I think mid-February, we're slated to go for approval so we could take that to the next step. So we have a lot going on in the area around making transportation improvements and mobility. And we're pretty excited to talk about that and answer any questions that you might have moving forward. So with that, we're going to go into the first topic. So let's see. We're going to address mobility, driving delay, and safety. And do we have an introductory info on this? Or should I just dive in?
Go ahead and dive in.
Okay, great, Vice Mayor. Well, we heard that there were some concerns around the ability for mobility, whether it be driving delay and safety. And so Matt, do you have a few things that you want to cover with that?
Yeah, I definitely could. I think for the UC Davis Sacramento campus, and I'll just start with our narrative, and then as we progress in the conversation, we might refer to some of the slides. But in many ways, the Sacramento campus is transitioning from an area that has extensive surface parking lots to, with more efficient use of land, higher density of our development, transferring some of that to parking structures, and also asking how can we reduce overall trips to and from the campus? What are ways that the UC Davis Sacramento, both planning and operation sides, can eliminate trips, where we can either look at ways for people to stay home, work from home, or where we can encourage people to use transit, use biking, walk to work, all of those kind of things to reduce trips. So if we could, I think, flip up, if you could, Jennifer, to our TDM slide. That was the first kind of blue and white effort we had there. That's our Transportation Tomorrow slide. This is charting, and it's a plan that's available on one of our websites. We can put that link in the chat. It's really focused on this primary goal in the middle there, asking each location, and this is a policy adopted by the UC Regents, asking each location to reduce the commute share of single occupancy vehicles by 10% relative to 2015 by 2025. And this planning effort that we completed had these guiding values of putting patients first, supporting the UC Davis mission, equity, sustainability, and placemaking. And the kind of highlights from that study are that there's a lot that we can do with employee incentives. And this next slide has a top 10 list, where we start with number 1 on the left, top left there, creating an integrated transportation platform and online marketplace so that it's easier for patrons to find parking options and see what their options could be in terms of either reduced cost, increased convenience, or alternative modes. Next is to align parking management to better use the existing spaces and build only the spaces that we think might be needed. The third there, incentivize preferred modes of transportation. The fourth, expand carpool. And it goes on through that top 10 list, and we can touch on some of those during the Q&A. And that's kind of our first effort at thinking about congestion on the overall campus and looking first at the idea of reducing trips and making those trips, where they're necessary, more efficient for people with higher occupancy in those vehicles. In terms of congestion, another issue that came up related to Aggie Square that we heard loudly during the public sessions that we've had over the last 2 years was Stockton Boulevard. And we've had some really good discussions in collaboration with the city about the Stockton frontage. And Bob, did you want to touch on sort of the frontage design and some of the details there about the intersections and the bike and ped connection?
Yeah, and just a thought first, Matt, on these kind of top 10 on the trying to manage transportation demand and cut down on trips. As you can imagine, I think this list was completed just before the pandemic, and the emergence of telework is clearly something that's getting investigated in a really robust way to see how many people that can work for, and still keep people productive at what they do. But that's an area that was on the list before and is pretty close to the top of the list now, along with all the shared mobilities that are on here. So there's that. Matt was prompting the conversation, and Jennifer may want to jump in here too, about something we can do immediately adjacent or on the edge of Aggie Square to comport with the recommendations that are coming out of the city's corridor study. So maybe Jennifer, a brief description of sort of the objectives of that, and then I can say a word about how we can accommodate that on the Aggie Square site.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. So I'm gonna actually, I don't think any of my slides cover that too well, but I'll go back to the campus map. So as part of the Drew's Stockton Boulevard corridor study, it's 4 miles. It's from Alhambra all the way down to 47. But a big part of that is right at the campus area. That includes a couple of significant improvements. The first improvement is right here at the intersection of Broadway and Stockton. We are recommending a protected intersection. So for those of you who don't know what a protected intersection is, it is an intersection that provides for separation of bicyclists from moving vehicles with some curbs. And so it allows for circulation around the intersection and is a higher level of comfort and lower stress for people biking, and also improves conditions for those who are walking. So we have that recommendation. And then also along the frontage of stuff from Stockton, from Broadway and Stockton on up north, we're including a two-way bicycle facility as well as pedestrian facility that would run along in the campus frontage. That would provide a low stress connectivity to the campus, but also for those who are continuing on past.
Yeah, so fortunately thank you, Jennifer. So fortunately, we're at a similar place in our planning where these recommendations were coming out of the city's corridor study after all their engagement and outreach. And so we were able to set back the buildings along the Aggie Square frontage to make sure that it accommodated the dimension that was needed for this off-street bike and pedestrian connector. So that's moving forward through the city process, but we were able to match up the Aggie Square plans to help make that happen.
And then I'll jump in. One of the other items off of that top 10 list was to integrate better with public transit. And we have a project that's underway right now. It's our Parking Structure 4 project. And although the main effort of that is to build structured parking, the east side of that was an opportunity for us to better connect from X Street up to V Street, a really enhanced pedestrian and bike connection, with the intent that by improving that connection into the Elmhurst neighborhood, there would be a long-term vision of trying to get more people to use light rail, and whether they're commuters or who are commuting to the campus for their workday, or residents who are leaving their residence and getting up to use light rail to get out to their job, that having a really enhanced walkway and pedestrian connection in that location was the first step of providing better north to south connectivity. And then there's other items that we're working on that are to improve the shuttle service that gets folks up to light rail from the campus, and continuing to work with SACRT on partnerships. One item that's coming up is we know we have a lot of employees who live in Elk Grove. We think about 1,800, and having better transit for those folks to get up to the campus in the morning and then get back home in the evening is another partnership opportunity that we are really looking forward to. So I think we're touching on some of these highlights.
Matt, if I could stop you for 1 second, we did have a question that's pertinent to what you were just talking about, which is where's the nearest light rail stop? Maybe we could talk about light rail and bus lines very quickly, and then are there sidewalks around in that area as well? So I don't know if you want to answer that, or I know James is here from RT.
Yeah, let's get that on the diagram so we can point to it, because we did label those connections that go up from the campus across X Street, both to the 48th Street light rail station and the 39th Street light rail station. So, you know, ideally, wouldn't we all have liked light rail to stop right at the hospital? Unfortunately, it doesn't, but gee, it's very close. And it's close enough that with some encouraging and some enhancements, whether it's wider sidewalks, better lighting, better signage, I think that is a real opportunity, is to get folks up to light rail. And of course, some people would rather have a shuttle, and we'll continue to provide that. But those are really great opportunities that I think should be top of our mind for all of the mobility planning that's going on. There are sidewalks there that connect now. I think one item that might be in the future would be kind of a walk audit to look at the condition of those in terms of cracks and heaving from tree roots or narrowness and lighting, and think about ways to improve those sidewalks in the future. We didn't touch on it very much, but as part of our Aggie Square planning, we're looking at we're calling it a mobility hub. And that's the center of campus, just on the the left side of the education core, just north of Aggie Square, a spot for electric buses and non-electric buses to serve as a central transit facility within the campus. And that mobility hub would have things like bike share, scooter share, car share, bike repair, and kind of the arrival and departure amenities that employees and patients would need if they wanted to embark on public transit to get to the hospital or the rest of the campus. And that's
we also have, and some of these questions I think we'll just do as we go along because they fit right into what you're saying.
Yeah.
Did you say there would be a shuttle, or is there already a line that moves folks from light rail to UC Davis Hospital?
Yeah, we already have that shuttle system that's in place, and we're looking at some upgrades to that, but a lot of that's already in place.
Great,
and
thank you.
One of the key upgrades we're thinking about is electrification of those vehicles so that we can reduce those emissions and transition that entire fleet to electric vehicles in the coming years.
Great. And then we also have a question, and I want to ask everyone, please put your questions in the Q&A function rather than the chat box to make sure we get to them. But we do have a question about access from both 99 and 50 onto the campus.
Yeah, so we know that for 50, there's quite a bit of peak hour congestion, and that there's signals that are backing up and experiencing delay for folks. And that's a concern because it's inconvenient, it's inefficient in terms of emissions. And then even for ambulance access to and from the hospital, that's a concern. We know that our primary effort of reducing trips through TDM and encouraging people to avoid trips, particularly during the peak hour, is one of those tools that we can use. Things like traffic light signalization might be another. Jennifer, you might want to mention some of that work, and coordination with Caltrans for things like signal timing and on-ramp timing is another element that can be successful for helping to reduce that congestion.
Yeah, Matt, you're absolutely right. So as the city does our projects, and I'm gonna quickly slide with the overview of our efforts. When we do major projects like these, we upgrade our traffic signals. Some of our traffic signals could be really old, 60, 70 years old, and they can't do all the things that we want them to do. And so as these projects move forward, we'll be able to upgrade them, upgrade the technology, so that even if we're making other changes, such as putting in a bikeway or a bus lane, that we can still improve efficiency and keep folks moving with better technology. And so it's a big thing of what we'll be doing as we move forward with these efforts.
Okay.
I don't see other questions. So should I go on and highlight some of the work that the city's doing in the area and then pass it over to RT?
Yeah, well, we have one quick question. Eric is typing an answer to, so if people maybe not.
I
What
just
was that?
said Google. I just did Google Maps, and it said about 7-minute walk, 3 blocks.
Okay, great, thank you. From the light rail to the hospital.
Yep.
So, all right, terrific. Jennifer, go ahead and talk about some of what we're doing already.
Great. Thank you, Vice Mayor Chenier. So we're doing a lot of work. I've covered a lot of this work already, but I wanted to highlight how it relates to some of the questions that we heard around mobility, around congestion and travel delay, and around safety. So these projects that we're doing, one, are going to inherently improve mobility for folks. So however you move, you walk, you roll, you drive, you take the bus, you share a vehicle, that all of these will improve conditions, because our city is 170 years old. A lot of our technology and our infrastructure is almost as old as that. So we're working to improve that. And so whether it be a traffic signal or a curb ramp for your person with disabilities, or a parent with a stroller, we'll be improving curb ramps around there, because mobility really is about access and how we connect folks, which is why we're comprehensively building this map that you see that's connected, really thinking about that network of through the neighborhoods and serving the neighborhoods for people moving around. And so we're creating new bikeways. So all of these Broadway and Vision Broadway and the Vision Zero work on Broadway include bikeways. The Stockton Boulevard project includes continuous bikeways north-south, where you see the orange area there. And then obviously we're doing a lot of safety improvements. If you've heard me talk before, I will continue to tell you the importance of traffic safety in our city. We continually rank to be one of the worst in California around traffic safety, and the biggest issue that we face is speeding. And one of the best things we can do to address speeding is slowing folks down, using signal technology to manage the speeds of our vehicles while still allowing for throughput. So a lot of these projects and the technology will help us continue to move folks through. Not through your neighborhood, we don't want to move through, but connect you to where you want to go to. And then there's the big effort within the neighborhood. So you see that school access work, working with the neighbors and the folks around within the neighborhood, not just focusing on the big streets, but looking at, I'm a bicyclist, and I know that getting through this area, I'm not biking right now on Broadway or Stockton, I'm biking through the neighborhood. If you're in Tahoe Park, I'm biking on 8th Avenue or 58th. If you're in Oak Park, I'm biking on 2nd or 5th. And then the 39th connection between the northern part of the city and down into here. And looking at those connections as well to see that we can improve mobility. So it's a comprehensive look that we're looking at. But we're working also really closely with regional transit. So I want to highlight some of Drew's work on the Stockton Boulevard corridor study. Includes a shared bus bike lane, because one of the things that we think is really important at the city is making transit attractive and convenient, and something that folks will want to get on. And so as part of the Stockton study, we're looking at giving RT a lane for a bit of the corridor. And so from that, I'm going to turn it over to James Boyle of Regional Transit to talk about the work that they're doing.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. And so I'm James Boyle. I'm the Director of Planning with Sacramento Regional Transit, and glad to be here this evening with you to talk a little bit about RT and some of our services and transit mobility options that we have for the general area. And for those of you who are familiar with the area, we have Route 51, which is by far one of our most popular, most successful bus routes in terms of ridership and frequency. It pretty much is our highest ridership corridor along Stockton Boulevard. And you can see that in the dark green line that comes up Stockton, Route 51, and then of course turns on Broadway there and heads back up into town. And then we also have Route 38. And this is a route that basically connects from 65th Street Light Rail Station through down Broadway and then back up Stockton back into town. And then most recently, we launched in partnership with YOLO Bus and UC Med Center, the Causeway Connection. That's Route 138 that you see there. So those are the fixed route bus options that currently serve the UC Davis Med Center complex. And we also have, don't know how many of you are familiar with our Smart Ride, our microtransit service. That service has a pickup drop-off location for UC Med Center, and that service is connected with our downtown, Midtown, East Sac zone. So there's quite a bit of transit that we offer in the general area in the vicinity. Route 38 is of particular interest because this one directly connects down to 65th Street, which is one of our largest transfer locations in our system. So probably closely behind Watt I-80, 65th is one of our largest bus to rail, rail to bus transfer locations. So a lot of folks coming in on bus can transfer to Route 38 and get over to the Med Center. And then, so we, work closely with the city, like Jennifer was talking about on the Complete Streets project for Stockton Boulevard. And there's a lot of interest of bus rapid transit and high capacity transit improvements on Stockton Boulevard. So that is something that we are studying ourselves, but in coordination with the city and the Complete Streets project. So it's exciting that we're finally talking about some bus lanes and bus and shared bike lanes in the corridor. And these things will all act together to help bring people to the Med Center or to this location here at Aggie Square. Route 38 basically encompasses the entire development from Broadway, then all the way back up Stockton. So we think we have a lot of potential opportunities for improvements on Route 38, and that could be adding more frequency to Route 38. So right now, Route 38 runs on 30-minute frequencies, pretty much during the weekday, and then 60-minute frequencies on the weekend. So there's definitely some opportunities there that we could work with the Med Center and possibly looking at upping up some of that frequency on Route 38. Route 51, the frequency on Route 51 is 15-minute headways, and even during the peak hour, we have up to 12-minute headways. So buses coming every 12 minutes past your stop location. And the little circles, the dots of color you see on the map, those represent stops, and those colors and size of the circle represent how often that stop is used. So you can see the intersection there at Broadway and Stockton, very busy in terms of passengers boarding and getting off of buses there. So we have a lot of passenger activity there. And it's exciting to hear Jennifer talk about the improvements that would be coming to that intersection, because we have a lot of folks getting on and off the bus there and crossing the street. So, not only are we talking about, possibly improvements to service on say Route 38 or even Route 51, but also in addition to that, we should not forget about our facilities, our bus stops, our benches and shelters. Those are all things that are important to the success of transit and to, encouraging people to use transit. So you can have, the best bus routes and the best frequency, but if you have very poor conditions for people to wait for the bus or even get to a bus stop, it's going to be really hard to get riders to those stops. So those are, in terms of bus stop locations and bus stop improvements, again, along Broadway there and also portions of Stockton. Those are locations that we can, again, work with the university and Med Center on making some major improvements there in terms of our bus stops. And again, we talked about BRT study and service along Stockton. And also, in the future, we could talk more about Smart Ride. But it's important to also think about the connections to light rail. And you can barely see it on my map here, but that gold line sort of in the upper right-hand corner there, that's the light rail. So the connections, from 39th Street to 48th Street, those are great. And shuttle service, improved shuttle service to connect folks to those light rail stations would be great also. But again, I kind of go back to Route 38 and the connections to 65th Street and the potential opportunities there too. So that's a pretty high level overview of RT and our services here that we hope can be used to help make this project successful and to, move people out of their cars and onto the bus and onto the trains, but also giving them an environment where they can walk and feel safe and crossing the street and not feel like they're going to get ran over by a car speeding down the road. So,
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks.
James. Maybe a quick question here for UC,
sure.
Matt, maybe from the UC folks. With all the bus route stops and the light rail stops or even bike options, can maybe you talk a little bit about the safe routes through campus as well as to campus?
Yeah, I think we do have some planning efforts that are coming up that are pretty exciting. We, in some of the public sessions and from our own experiences, know that in many ways the campus, kind of just because of the history of way these neighborhoods developed, the campus is kind of a blocker for access and for routing, and specifically things like east to west connectivity from the fairgrounds neighborhoods over to Oak Park, with not a great route that goes through the campus, or north-south access from south of Broadway up to Elmhurst. And one thing we're thinking of is to embark on a planning effort that would really work with each of those neighborhoods to think about desired access points, comfort level once you enter campus and proceed through either on a roadway or on a sidewalk, and figure out a long-term way to open up those routes so that the campus is less of a barrier and more of a connector for this part of Sacramento. So that's an item that I think that we're really excited about, and it also really follows another item we heard in some of the early Aggie Square public outreach, was a desire from the neighbors for the city and the campus to work more together. And that planning effort that we would embark on for routes to and through the campus would also be a collaboration to ideally work and say, okay, once you get off the campus boundary and you're continuing westward, what's the best route? What's the most comfortable, either for biking or for walking, to continue that route and make it connect to the next neighborhood and the next neighborhood. So that's one item that's coming up that's really exciting. Another is more internal to the campus, a great idea of doing a new bicycle master plan and looking at those actual on-road facilities for bikes, as well as the amenities for cyclists, whether it's bike parking, bike lockers, showers, signage, encouragement, incentives, and looking at ways to improve our messaging for cyclists. So that's one item. And Bob or Jennifer, you might have more thoughts on that idea of the planning effort and public outreach for the planning effort through into the campus.
I think you captured it well. Yeah.
Jennifer, I have a question for you. Anything to mitigate traffic through 2nd, 3rd, 4th Avenue of Oak Park, thinking about the commuters coming in from the south and or Elk Grove? It's a good question.
Yeah, thanks, Vice Mayor Chenier. And Amar, it's good to see you. It's been almost over a year, I guess, since we met at the this is relevant, the 2nd Avenue pop-up closure demonstration, where we looked at closing 2nd between 34th and Broadway. It's that little triangle area. And I met Amar there. We were hanging out, meeting with folks, talking to them about the potential for closing this. Well, we heard a lot of great feedback, and we're going to be moving forward with that effort. We'll be doing, nothing's on the books yet. We are getting ready to start our community engagement for actually moving that forward full force. So you'll be hearing from us on that, but that's one of the ways that we can look at to mitigate cut through traffic through the neighborhood. By cutting 2nd Avenue off from Broadway will help improve those conditions. But I think the big question that you have is, how will we envision overall cut through traffic through the neighborhoods? And it's something that we've heard from you and your neighbors a lot through this process. And it relates to the work that we've been talking about with Matt and Bob from UC Davis, this need to really look at a traffic calming program in the neighborhoods. We're looking for funding to make that happen. And believe you me, we're definitely looking forward to making that happen and finding that right funding source. And when we have that, we'll be sure to reach out to the neighbors to see about what your specific needs are.
Okay.
Bob or Matt, did you want to add anything to that, or a council member?
No, I was going to read you a couple more comments.
Please do.
And well, this is kind of a continuation. Are there plans to mitigate traffic on Broadway from 65th Street to the UCD campus?
Right now, at this point, the city does not have funding, and it's not a project that we're slated to have moving forward. It's an unfunded effort, but we have heard that that is a concern. We've had conversations with the UCD folks as part of the modeling to get an understanding of what that could be. And they are working on that at this point. Matt and Bob, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's exactly right. And one, in terms of efficiency, one item to layer into that would be the pedestrian crossings of Broadway. So that if we end up thinking about signal upgrades for Broadway, that we're also looking not just at accommodating the auto flow, but we're really making those crossings more comfortable and more conveniently spaced for the average pedestrian. That would be another item I would want to layer into that discussion.
Okay, I'm going to do one more question and then we need to move on to our next section, which is about parking. But there are a couple of things I didn't get to. So if people want to look at the Q&A, they can do that. And if we have time at the end, we'll go back and answer those. There's a question from Robert Snyder. Will there be any incentive by the city to increase restaurant, coffee houses, other retail as close to this project as possible to keep the many employees and visitors on foot rather than getting back into their vehicles for lunch and or dinner breaks? So I don't know, Bob, I know the city is not doing anything. I don't know what the UC Davis is looking at as far as keeping people on campus or close to.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. The Aggie Square project itself, I think it's going to have fairly modest food offerings. So it's a really good prompt, I think, for both city and campus to work more closely with the Stockton Boulevard partnership about. So we're going to create the demand, and so it's a matter of how that kind of supply of those services can be facilitated in walking distance. It's a really good prompt.
Okay, and maybe we don't have quite the right people from the city, but Leslie, if you can put that down, I think it's worth a further discussion at the city to see what we might be able to do. So I'll ask Leslie to do that. We have a couple more comments from an anonymous attendee and then also Stephanie Taylor. So I just want to let you know we're not ignoring you. We'll see if we can get back to you before the end, but I want to turn it over to Eric, who is going to be moderating the next couple of sections, first on parking and then on air quality. Eric?
Great. Well, thanks for that, Jay. And first, actually, before we move on to that, I think there was a last question there about, is the campus moving further out than its boundaries? But that kind of tees up a little bit to the question about the coffee shops and the restaurants. So Bob, can you quickly answer that question, whether the campus is moving out of its boundaries within Stockton and Broadway?
Yeah, no, there's nothing in this long-range plan to move beyond the existing boundaries of the campus in the immediate Sacramento campus area. There are investments going on further to the east in the Rancho Cordova area where some support service units are being relocated away from the campus, which actually is a somewhat mitigating factor to some of the new traffic demand that is getting generated. So some amount of the campus employee population is actually being moved to the east side of town.
But it does fit into, Jay, maybe on this, but it does fit into our overall Stockton Boulevard development plan about, creating some synergy down the boulevard by making sure that even though the campus is going to be between the Stockton and Broadway area, we have opportunities for growth for businesses, for housing on Stockton Boulevard.
Yeah,
we did
again, I would agree. And on this topic, the project that we're putting forward does really not have a retail component to speak of. So it's, there'll be some convenience food on site, but I think it does present a great opportunity in the immediate neighborhood for walkability and for some small business growth nearby.
I'm just going to lean into this a little bit. This is Leslie Fritchie with Economic Development. And I think the the demand that will be brought about by Aggie Square will help revitalization efforts along Stockton Boulevard. And the Stockton Boulevard specific plan will really look at how to encourage more retail activity and more restaurants, coffee shops, as the caller indicated, along Stockton, so that we really can encourage that walkability, bikeability, and redevelopment efforts along the boulevard, drawing out people from the campus to revitalize and provide some additional investments along the boulevard. So I thank you very much for that question. That's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I had to chime in. I couldn't resist.
Well, that's an important, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add in the other large group of employees who are there and would, I think, be attracted to lunch offerings is the Department of Justice employees, the large site that's along Broadway there. So just mentioning, it's not just UC employees. There's quite an employment base right in this immediate neighborhood. All right.
Great, thank you, Matt. And that goes into the issue of parking, because one of the things that we are interested in doing is also increasing the number of the ability for housing down Stockton Boulevard and local housing as well. So the more we can have folks live close by, hire from the neighborhood, the less impacts on parking. But let's start off with questions here on parking, moving on this area. So let me patch it over first to Matt and ask the question. You know, particularly for some of the neighborhoods in the area, there's always been parking challenges for the campus. What is the campus doing as far as development of parking for the campus, for its employees and students?
Yeah, let's start this conversation with first acknowledging what you just said, and it's that it has been an ongoing problem where the university, because we charge our employees for parking, we are an employer who has, unfortunately, this kind of off-site impact where certain employees hoping to avoid that cost will park in the kind of next convenient location. And we've seen that at our Davis campus and also here at the Sacramento campus. The standard tool to respond to that is to establish a parking district and really work with the city to figure out the most effective way to manage that district with parking restrictions in the neighborhood. That's one tool in the toolkit. The other is to look again at our own parking fees. And while we don't really subsidize parking for our employees, we also don't upcharge them just as a means to discourage parking. We try to charge that fair cost of parking and continue to do that in order to manage the parking program on campus for new facilities. Right now, we do see that we need to build more. We need to build more parking for the growth that we're expecting, and we need to realize that the growth that we're placing on the campus is largely happening on surface parking lots. So we have one new parking structure that's underway, and we'll, I think, finish by the end of this year. We have two others that were being planned, and we expect to continue to dial in on trying to build the right amount of parking. But with each of those steps, we really want to turn back to our plan that I illustrated earlier, the Transportation Tomorrow plan, and look at ways to reduce that overall demand with employee incentives, with kind of changing our culture, with partnering on local transit options. And I think for this campus, really looking at light rail and figuring out what are the incentives, what would it take to get our employees onto light rail, and maybe even encouraging new employees to look at, when they choose a residence location, choose it at near a light rail station, so that becomes an easy and comfortable way for them to complete their commute every day. So that's kind of the toolkit. There's a lot of questions, a lot more detail we can go into. And I think back to that first item, like what is in the toolkit, it's working with the city. And this is a prompt for looking at a fresh question of, are the districts right as they are right now? Is there a need for more? Is there a need for either a new technology to manage that for the residents, or better enforcement?
Great.
So,
Well, there's a few questions here that popped up, and maybe if using the map might help as well, identifying where parking is at. But will there be new parking? Will the new parking garages be activated at the ground level? I think it's probably fair to say that the parking garage that's on Stockton Boulevard kind of created a dead zone along that area where it may look artistically nice but has no activation. And one of the concerns that's been brought up is, how do you activate that? So maybe if you could describe, you said potentially 3 parking structures on the campus, but could you maybe show where that or where you think parking might affect that area?
Yeah, I can start on that one. So first part of it, so the existing Aggie Square, I'll start with Aggie Square, the existing Aggie Square site just south of 2nd Avenue along Stockton, where you see the buildings there. That is a current surface parking lot. Most of the people who park there work at the hospital. So step one is there's a replacement parking structure underway that should be finished before Aggie Square starts, up in the top of that orange zone near the hospital, that will replace the parking that will be lost at Aggie Square plus some. It adds some supply as well. Matt probably knows more of the numbers on it. So that's step one. So, well, no more planned parking structures along Stockton Boulevard, first, to get directly to your question. And then second, there's a parking structure planned with Aggie Square, and it's directly south of directly underneath that pink zone, where the pink zone drops down. It's right under that. And it's very much in kind of a backdoor location behind the central energy plant, and south of the facilities maintenance building. So it has no real public visible frontage. The narrow end of it will be on 49th Street there. So very attentive to that, aware that a lot of the big parking structures near the hospital, they needed the supply so much to feed the hospital that they made them floor to ceiling. But that's why we were really attentive in the Aggie Square plan to create public space that will be full of people along Stockton Boulevard, not the side of a parking structure.
And I'll go one step further, because the question you asked about was, could we activate that ground floor? And I think a lot of cities have been successful in doing that with their parking structures, where that ground floor could be retail, it could be a community serving use, so that for the pedestrian, it's not this experience of walking alongside a concrete structure. It is instead kind of part of the fabric of a neighborhood. We've tried to do that with our design, but we've not found that we even host the right retail tenants to put into that kind of facility. So instead, these new parking structures, what they do have is a pretty connected open space network that connects people back from the structure or from the campus boundary back into the rest of the network of either the community to the north or the campus to the south. So I had talked earlier about that 48th Street connection along V Street. We also have a 40-foot landscape buffer, and we're trying to put in a small park area as part of that. And similarly, along the Stockton frontage up where the big parking structure 2 is, will in the future be a large open space connected facility that we go up from Stockton up to V Street. To V Street. So sorry to ramble on, but it is, for us, what we found to be our next best alternative, instead of activating the frontage of those with uses inside, is to more activate it as open space and make it an experience for that is more contributing to the neighborhood in that way.
Great. And then, so maybe this is a question for Jennifer going wide here. So it's the paradox of you create parking structures to avoid parking in the neighborhood, but the parking structures also create an incentive to drive. So Jennifer, maybe if you could talk a little bit about parking and why all the other pieces are interconnected to this question.
Councilmember Guerra, great connection of all the different pieces. I mean, it's a layered approach that we have to take. And it's an evolving approach because we can't just immediately not have parking because they're one, if Aggie Square doesn't provide parking, they still have people driving at this point because we don't have the rich transit and walking and biking network yet. Folks are not living close enough. So there's this balance. And so there are a couple of things that we can do. One, you'll see up here on your screen is a map of the areas around Aggie Square and UC Davis that have residential parking permit programs. And so this is where you need a permit to be able to park on street. There is obviously, it is around the campus, but if there are issues, our parking division is happy to work with the neighborhoods to look about expanding that. And so if anybody has those questions, just let us know. We can get you in touch with our parking division who handles this. And then also our enforcement to make sure that our parking enforcement officers are out there taking care of ensuring that you have your residential parking permit if you're parking on street in that neighborhood. And again, if that's an issue, we're happy to work with our parking division to bring those enforcement officers out to your neighborhood. But then before we don't have parking, we really need to think about, well, what are the other ways that folks can get to the campus? Because not everybody can afford to live a couple of blocks away. And so partnering with regional transit and then other transit providers to make it attractive. What can we do to improve the conditions? How can we improve the convenience and the frequency? And an example of that is the work that we're doing with RT on Stockton Boulevard. So not only are we recommending that we have a bus lane there, but upgrading our traffic signal so that we can give priority to the buses when it comes through, so we can clear the traffic signal ahead of all the other vehicles and improve efficiency as it moves down the corridor. Really important to do. I'm the biggest fan of transit. James Boyle knows I'm always talking about how much I love the bus. And so working with, improving those conditions. And then the bikeway network. We didn't get to talk about this earlier, but Councilmember Guerra, I know you know, the intersection of Stockton and T, it's a big issue that we need to address. And we're doing that through the Stockton Boulevard effort. So if you've been through the area, T Street is a fabulous bikeway on either side of Stockton and T. At Stockton and T, the bikeways go away. And so Drew's effort is really looking at in really fine-grained detail of how we can continue the bikeway through that intersection for a low-stress, family-friendly bikeway across Stockton on T. So those like that fine grain of detail. We're also talking about wayfinding. So how can we direct people who are biking through and to where they want to get to? Because I've lived in Sacramento for 10 years now. I bike through the campus all the time, and I always have to pull out my phone. Where do I turn to get back up to V Street? Because I can never remember where it is, even though I've done it a million times. So wayfinding will help. And so we're looking at this layered approach of both carrots and sticks. So trying to limit the amount of parking, but not so much that it becomes a burden for the neighborhood, at the same time as working with transit, encouraging walking and biking so that we can have other modes of travel in the area.
Great, thank you. And yes, I do know that biking situation there. Before COVID hit, my son and I would take the bike route through 57th Street onto T Street and cut right through T, and then it's white knuckles crossing Stockton Boulevard. So I do encourage everyone. There is a Stockton Boulevard community meeting to get an update, webinar on Stockton Boulevard. And I think somebody already put it on the chat here. We'll put the information about the upcoming webinar on the developments of Stockton Boulevard, which include a number of these in more detail. And then lastly, I want to go back to Bob here before we get going on the other questions, or Matt, about the mobility hub. And in order to reduce parking, again, trying to get more people to bike, but this mobility hub, can you go in a little more detail? What is actually a mobility hub? And how does that affect the demand on parking?
Yeah, well, what we're planning, and I think there could be other examples, but what we're planning is this facility that is sited at the heart of the campus so that there's easy, and we're thinking it's about a 5-minute walk for most of the employees to get to almost any of the buildings on the campus from this central location. And the stop would have clear signage and arrival information for waiting patrons. And then it would have the extra layers of amenities that I described earlier. Everything from convenient and very secure bike locks, bike racks, to more secure bike lockers. We're thinking of a bicycle repair station or even a bike rental facility. And then with whatever service is most appropriate, a bike share and scooter share program that would be part of that, so that transit riders would be able to get off the bus, have quick access for bike or other modes, or even be able to participate in a car share program within just a few steps, or certainly within a visual connection. They'd be able to see that car share opportunity and either subscribe or immediately utilize that car if that's their next mode to get to their destination. So that's the outline of it. And then in terms of the actual vehicles that would be using the mobility hub, we're thinking it would be both the regional transit and larger buses that would access into the campus and utilize the facility. And then also we would integrate that with the campus shuttle system, so that if someone did need to transfer from an arriving bus, say from Roseville or Davis, and hop on a shuttle to get to the Midtown Clinic or to another building that's maybe even on the campus, that would be a pretty quick crossover to get onto that other vehicle. So that's what we're planning. And the last layer of it is comfort and making sure that people feel that they are safe at that facility, that it's well lit, that it's clean, it's well taken care of, that it's comfortable seating, probably has Wi-Fi and shade, and is a kind of not just a place to wait for the bus, but hopefully a pleasant part of their day would be making that transition as they access transit.
Great, thank you. And then Jennifer here, you know, there was a question about there are no parking permit areas south of Broadway, say maybe the neighbors down in that area. How is that effort created? How is
Councilor Garrett, it's actually a community-driven effort. So the community has decided this is an issue, your neighborhood, your neighbors, and you say, yeah, I'm fed up with this. We want to create a residential permit parking program. What you do is you get your neighbors together, you contact the parking division. We want to make sure that your neighbors are on board, so we do an evaluation to make sure that happens. And then they actually do a parking study to say, okay, do you actually experience people from outside of your neighborhood regularly parking in your neighborhood? And they do that, and then they determine there are different thresholds. And if you meet the threshold for that, then the parking division will work with you to install that. And in fact, one of the great things I love about our parking division, if you haven't met Matt Ironman, who is the division manager for parking, embraces technology. And we've moved away from having to go into City Hall with your 2 forms of ID to fill out some paperwork to get your residential parking permit. And now you can do it all online. And as a resident with a car who has to park on street in a residential permit parking area, I very much appreciate that. And it'll be much easier for all of you that you already have one, or if you'd like to get a process in your neighborhood to do it all online rather than having to come into City Hall. But let us know if it's an issue. Reach out. If you have my email address, I'm sure it's published with this effort. I can put you in touch with the folks who manage that to see if this is something that we can do in your neighborhood.
Great, thank you. Yes. Interestingly, I haven't heard any issues regarding parking from that area of Tahoe Park in that area. But if you do have issues, reach out. I think those are the questions on parking. So, Jay, do you have any questions on parking here?
No, I think we're okay. There was one question. I don't know if this got answered. Will new parking garages be activated at ground level?
Oh, yes, we did. And we don't have any parking garages coming online on Stockton Boulevard, but they are looking at how they orient them in the center of campus and what location.
Yeah.
So the
I think if you want to move to air quality, that would be great.
Yeah. So now we're moving on to air quality. So questions about air quality. The Sacramento Air Quality Management District, which a number of your council members, county supervisors, and from all the cities sit on, submitted a letter regarding the environmental impact report about air quality. So So question here for Matt or for Bob. How do you manage and mitigate air quality when you have a growing project like this? And what are the things that UC Davis is looking at doing to manage and mitigate air quality?
Yeah, that's great, and I'm glad we set up this air quality discussion to be part of this, because the two really are linked, with obviously emissions from vehicles being large contributors to air quality. And thankfully, with a lot of the leadership from the state, we have cleaner and cleaner vehicles in both current use and expected for future fleet. Overall, composition of vehicles that are on the roads are going to get cleaner and cleaner over time. That's one thing that's supportive of our efforts. Another is the shift to electric vehicles and their really improved emissions the improved emissions that will come with that. So I think the overall trend is supportive of long-term having cleaner and cleaner air in our region, hopefully. For the Aggie Square and the LRDP effort, we really took a more detailed look at first the effort of what can we commit to in terms of trip reductions. And that is the item I illustrated earlier, with the 10% reduction by 2025 compared to our 2015 condition. And then a more stringent, I believe it's a 2040 metric that is also aimed at further pushing down our single occupancy vehicle usage, with the idea that that the single occupancy vehicles are the best opportunity to get people to carpool, bike pool, use transit, and hopefully avoid trips. And I think now, within the last year, the realization that a lot of work could be done at home, I think that will be more and more a layer of trip avoidance and trying to reduce emissions from trip avoidance. So I did want to mention that the other efforts we're looking at are during construction. What are all the ways we can require cleaner and cleaner off-road construction vehicles to be used? What are the ways we can design the buildings to be very energy efficient so that their emissions are lower? We, with the Aggie Square project, have committed to not using natural gas and instead powering the Aggie Square buildings entirely from SMUD's green energy program. So that's a big step forward in planning and designing buildings of large size to be free of natural gas. And then during operations, also looking at ways to further reduce trips and promote trip reduction. I'll wrap up with one illustration, and this is really just getting into the kind of level of detail once we're in a site plan that we can consider. We needed for Aggie Square to include emergency generators. We know that power outages are common, and the research that will go on inside the Aggie Square buildings needs to be supported by emergency power, so that samples in freezers or important lab projects are not left to thaw if there's a power outage. So we need emergency generators. We've planned those to be very efficient. One question that came up was, well, the testing, the monthly testing of those, that causes emissions. Is there a way that we can reduce the effects of those emissions? And what we committed to with Aggie Square was to conduct that monthly testing during the weekends, because that's the time when the adjacent elementary school children are not at the site. So that is the optimal site to conduct that monthly testing and validation process for the emergency generators. And I'm not mentioning that to say or try to wave away the other emissions, but I am mentioning it to say we have been really attentive to both the large picture of overall trip reduction, and then even trying to dial into small things like that extra element. So that's kind of where we're started. Yeah.
Great. And then there was a question about air monitoring. And Bob, we brought this up earlier because folks in the neighborhood have been asking for air monitoring around the Stockton Boulevard, Broadway area, Oak Park, Fruit Ridge. But this is a question here. Would UC Davis consider installing an air monitor on the campus?
Yeah, just need more information about it. Matt. I don't know if you have any experience, but
I'd heard the question earlier, the week or so ago it came up, and I've not had an opportunity to look into it. I think it would be a great idea. We'd want to partner and make sure that we're collecting data that's useful to hopefully the air district, and make sure that we're looking at equipment that is reliable and robust and matches the type of equipment that they would want to use. And then we'd want to consider for the quality of the data, the best location, and where that best location could end up. I think we would definitely be interested in that type of conversation.
Great, and just for your edification, Valley Vision is working with a number of the environmental justice groups to locate air monitors within the neighborhood itself. But the city of Rancho Cordova itself, a few weeks ago, approved their own funding for air monitors in Rancho, and then last night I requested the city council also approve some funding for air monitors throughout the city as well. So I think this is a good opportunity for UC Davis to also step up and participate in that effort. Of course, they have to be located and sited so that we have them in the best location to collect that information. Last question on air quality here, and then I think we don't have any other questions, Jay, unless you're seeing them. But you mentioned car share, right, on the campus. Is that electric car share, and how are those other efforts to go electric coming along?
Yeah,
Dulcich, maybe you could let me jump in here and you can fill me out. We've
I was
got
going to
few
say our
slides to
colleague
see
Jennifer
that.
Venema might jump in and provide some information for us. Jennifer.
Great, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Councilmember Guerra. Jennifer Venema, I'm the interim climate action lead at the city of Sacramento. And as we know, mobile sources are the biggest contributor to air pollution. And what we're really excited is that through our partnerships, we've been able to do a lot for the community with the leadership we have here represented, Councilmember Chenier, who's on the RT board, Councilmember Guerra, who's on the Air District. We've worked with our partners, with UC Davis, with SAC-RT. We actually secured a very competitive, one-of-a-kind $44 million investment from Electrify America to pay for the programs that you heard referenced earlier. We were able to get 12 all-electric buses for the Causeway Connection. And now, rather than just serving UC Davis employees, this is public transit that RT and Yolo County Transit District are operating together. So now that's an amenity available to the whole neighborhood. We also have the nation's largest free-floating electric car share program, Gig Car Share. You see that little black car with the blue bike racks on your screen. Really fun to drive. You need an app, sign up through the app, and actually the service is already in operation throughout the entire neighborhood of this project site. And Jennifer, you could just flip it over to the next screen. But we also wanted to make sure folks know is that we've really been doing a lot here to electrify transportation with a lot of citywide benefit and more to come near the project site. Recently, we released the first electric vehicle progress report. I'll drop the link in the chat here, where you can see a lot of the accomplishments over the last couple of years. As I mentioned, over a $44 million investment over the last, just since 2017, we've had a big influx in terms of publicly available chargers. We are one of the densest concentrations of fast chargers in the nation, and we're doing more. The city just secured nearly $2 million from the Energy Commission to bring more car share and level 2 chargers citywide. You can see the map on the right side of the screen. We're actually also bringing an e-bike lending pilot together with the public library, which will be available at one library site. We're looking at Colonial Heights on Stockton Boulevard as a potential candidate, but there'll be chargers coming to Coloma Community Center, to Colonial Heights Library, to Oak Park Community Center, and others in the area. So I'll put more information in the chat, reach out with more questions, but just want to emphasize that we've been able to achieve some really exciting progress leading the nation for vehicle electrification because of the strength of our partnerships.
Thank you very much, Jennifer Venema. We have the dueling Jennifers here, Jennifer Dolan-Weil on transportation and Jennifer Venema on our all our climate change initiatives here. Let's see, I don't have any other questions here in the chat box. Or what's the average cost to charge an electric vehicle at OPCC, for example, or at the Oak Park Community Center? What's the average cost?
The chargers aren't in Oak Park Community Center yet, but if you go to any city facility where we offer charging, the charging is currently free. So in our parking garages at locations like 300 Richards, it's no cost. Now, it's something that we will be transitioning over time. I will say, though, that with the car share expansion to community center and library locations, that will be a subsidized program that's operated by the Air District to income eligible participants. So with the potential to ride in those cars for free or for significantly discounted rates.
Great. There was a question here about a city link that isn't working. So if I could have some staff look at that city link as we're putting up information. Yeah, and so the charging, we're also, Jennifer, maybe you could talk a little bit about as we're expanding and looking at the construction of affordable housing in other areas. Can you talk about some of the car share programs that are also being part of that in those efforts? I think there's one on Stockton, one off of Lemon Hill with mutual housing. But can you talk just a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we have a few types of car share. So first is the free floating car share available throughout the Central City, Tahoe Park, Oak Park, and that's available to any eligible driver on the street. Those cars are parked in the right of way where they're visible. In addition, as Councilmember Guerra just noted, there's also more private forms of car share that have been placed at several affordable housing sites. There's a few different programs here. So the Air District offers the subsidized program, including at the Lemon Hill location. And that is the program that we're helping to expand with funding from the Energy Commission and other state sources. Envoy also operates car share that's available at multifamily housing at approximately 45 locations throughout the city. So working with those partners, trying to connect them to property owners and to provide that as an amenity so that families can either use that as their main source of vehicular trips, or perhaps get rid of one of the vehicles that perhaps they only need them frequently at home. So this is also a potential cost savings, and studies show by providing car share, we're also achieving reductions in VMT because people consolidate trips and travel more efficiently.
Great. And there's one last question I think that Stephanie here writes, and we discussed this earlier, but for those who are just joining in, will there be right-of-way by UC Davis to enhance sidewalk space, seating, gardens, and artwork? But we all know that walking and adding trees and increasing our tree canopy also improves our air quality. So maybe for you, Bob, on this closing question.
Yeah, so two thoughts. One mentioned that there will be a new public open space, green space as a part of Aggie Square right on Stockton Boulevard. Two, we are setting the buildings back enough for new bikeway, pedestrian way that matches up with the city planning effort along the corridor. And one more thing that's just emerging, the very west end of the current hospital has to be demolished because of seismic concerns. It'll be replaced with new construction on the east end. And that's going to be replaced with a new green space that will connect from Stockton Boulevard up near Sherman Way, all the way up to V Street and the Elmhurst neighborhood. So actually there'll be another potential nice walkable green corridor connecting our neighborhoods to the north with our neighborhoods to the west right through the campus. So yeah, we are looking for opportunities, particularly along Stockton, to open up green connectors.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. All right, Jay, I think that was all the questions we had on this item here. And I'll pass it back over to you.
Yeah, no, I think it's just time for the thank yous. We appreciate everybody's time tonight, Bob and Matt and the Jennifers and Leslie. James, thanks for visiting from RT. I think that was really helpful. We obviously have a lot of work still to do, but we're continually trying to improve the project, working in partnership with UC Davis and Wexford, and we'll continue to do that. I'm assuming we're going to do at least one more community town hall like this as we move ahead in the project before it comes back to the city council. But I would say if you have specific questions, you can email either Eric or myself at our city hall offices, and we'll do our best to get back to you and answer any questions that you have. So with that, I just want to say thanks, Eric.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and again, whoop, they just put it up there. Save the date. If you want to learn more about Stockton Boulevard and all the great efforts that have been going on, I think Jay and I have had a great partnership with both our communities and saying it takes both of our neighborhoods to really make a new vision for the Boulevard. So join on February 10th, 6 p.m. for the Stockton Boulevard plan.
All right. Stay safe, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
So.
Thank you.